and I guess we would call this section 3, 4.
Actually, it's 4 if you include the pilot. Yes.
If you include the pilot, yes. So in this discussion, we want to focus on insurance, because insurance is already a very high-profile topic in our society. But especially when you get a disease and you're getting this kind of treatment, and the bills that are coming are so much higher. Matt, you've got firsthand experience for our viewers as to what that problem looks like. And so let's talk a little bit about what you experienced and what it felt like to try to get these giant bills and figure out, what to do with them. And then maybe in the end, we can talk about what you've learned in the process that might be helpful.
Well, I think one of the things that is challenging in the United States is that doctors will tell you that anxiety does not cure anything. And so when you're dealing with something as serious as cancer, and you're dealing with the anxiety of, facing bankruptcy, it's not a good situation.
Oh, man.
And so what I would say is 2 things. We talked in our last episode about heading into a trial. And one of the things I'm faced with now is what is paid for by the trial sponsor and what is considered ongoing treatment for this cancer that I'm being treated for. So my oncologist is passing me over to another doctor, just like when I did CAR T. It's like, you're now under the care of the immunotherapy people in the Seattle Cancer Care Alliance. They'll take over whatever. And so, again, you got to watch out, because everything relative to cancer treatment and hospital stays and clinic visits is extremely expensive, shockingly expensive. And so over the last 6 years, I've literally needed to have legal advice. And my wife and I have spent now over $25,000 in just making sure that we're not in trouble, we're not doing something wrong, we're not going to get fined, there's not going to be something that's just a big fat mess, or have a bill land on our plate that somehow just isn't covered by anybody. And so you might think, well, geez, I have insurance and I'm fine. And you've even tested that by you went skiing and you broke your finger and you went to the doctor and you paid a copay and everything was fine.
Yeah.
So people say to me sometimes, well, I'm really satisfied with my insurance. I would challenge that. I don't think you really know that until the bill is $280,000 for one surgery, and then all of a sudden your insurance company seemingly has a new attitude, right? It's all about, holy smokes. I think even insurance companies sometimes get shocked by the cost of this. So what's very frightening is when you begin to see the cost of this kind of treatment, you think to yourself, my God, I really, really need to look after coverage. I have to make sure that I'm covered. And
so this trial that you're about to go into, is insurance going to cover it?
No. There's 2 parts. The trial is sponsored by a private pharmaceutical.
I see.
And they basically, in effect, contract with the doctor and indirectly the hospital where the doctor practices. These days, doctors aren't employed by the hospitals, generally speaking. They're, in effect, contractors.
Yeah.
So you're dealing with not only the doctor himself, but then you've got the nurses, and the hospital is different. And then in my case, because I'm a myeloma patient, which has been in and out of remission many, many times, there's what you would consider ongoing or maintenance treatment. And so what I'm kind of faced with going into this trial is making sure that something doesn't fall between the sponsor is going to pay for, and in each trial, what the sponsor is going to pay for is different. And so there's going to be kind of this thing that could crop up where, well, that's ongoing treatment. So the sponsor is not going to pay for that. And then maybe, I'm making this up, but hypothetically, there could be a situation where, well, the trial caused X to happen, and therefore you were hospitalized, but that's not the fault. Yeah, that's kind of, it's not our fault. You agreed that we could do this trial, and again, I'm just sort of making things up. But you do have to be aware.
Is there a circumstance where the insurance company might say, "Yeah, we're not going to cover that either"?
Correct.
And we say that's part of a trial, and then the trial people say, "No, that's not part of the trial," and you're kind of stuck in this middle zone.
Yeah, you may recall that on CAR-T, at one point in time, there was a delay because private insurance that I had at that time was saying, we'll pay for everything right up to that day when you get your modified T cells back. Well, that's the day the danger begins, right?
Right.
And so it's like, wait a minute. You're going to pay for taking my T cells out and some of the clinical part that's not covered by the trial. And finally, we negotiated back and forth, and the private insurance that I had at the time decided they would cover all of this kind of ancillary cost that are separate but related to the trial.
So that's interesting what you said there. You said you negotiated. So is that some advice you give to folks? You know, don't just take what they say, push back and actually negotiate with them, and maybe you'll get a better outcome financially.
Well, yeah, I needed to have the support of my oncologist and the trial, both with regard to going back to private insurance and explaining to them. Now, keep in mind, like I said, every trial sponsor has in effect, a contract that says, you know, there's two parts to that. One, here's the agreement we have with the doctor who's doing the trial, and here's what you can forward through that doctor to the patient.
Gotcha.
And it's different every time.
Right.
So you got to be very aware of who's paying for what, and then go back to your insurance to make sure, okay, this is going to happen. We're heading into a trial, but they're not going to cover this. I'm calling you to ask, are you going to cover this?
Yeah.
And the answer might be, I'll get back to you.
Yeah, right. So, you know, for someone who might be just heading into this unfortunate adventure, what advice would you have for them on what you've learned going through it to help them on the insurance side?
Well, and this is a really huge challenge to ask Americans to do, but fortunately, I was able to afford attorneys, and I'm not sure if I mentioned this in our pilot episode, but to date, I've spent over $25,000 on attorneys to help me.
Yeah.
And I say attorneys, plural.
Right.
It's complicated. And again, this I think would be a real challenge to most Americans. Do you have a fund sitting there where you can go in and pay? And by the way, you're going to need a crackerjack attorney. You're not going to be able to find an ambulance chaser, if you will, that's going to circumnavigate the complexity of this. And so, you know, when people say, gee, I'm really against single payer healthcare and what have you, I think your attitude might change on that a little bit, especially for me, knowing people, good friends who live in England, as an example, who look at our situation, and friends in Canada who look at my situation and they're just beside themselves. Like, I can't imagine dealing with cancer. In fact, friends of mine in England, the wife had gone through cancer treatment. And so she was very aware of course, how she was covered in England versus my situation in America. And it's just like, I can't even fathom going through chemo and all these other things that you've done, and you have to worry about who's paying for what.
Right.
And, I got to tell you, just to kick off this calendar year, 2020, I went in on January the 3rd for some tests and so on and so forth. I came out, and I didn't have to pay this, but that day cost $43,000.
That's amazing.
And that was
that's
tests.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. So it kind of in conclusion, then, it sounds like the real key is you have to advocate for yourself.
Absolutely.
Whether that's getting resources outside and a lawyer, or whether that's, having all your medical resources at your side to help you deal with your insurance company to get the most coverage you can get.
Well, I have to thank all of those buyers and lawyers at places like Boeing and Microsoft and Amazon, because in my career, I negotiated contracts and had to, I'm not an attorney, of course, or even a paralegal,
Right.
but I think you've had the same experience where you have to have a pretty good idea of the annual volume agreement with Boeing, which is 400 pages. Well, that kind of gave me the experience of reading these kind of contracts. And I think for your average person in America, they might not have that experience.
Yeah.
And
well, hopefully they can get access to someone that can be useful to them, whether it's an uncle or a lawyer friend or someone. But I think we all need to help each other in our current environment, because it's so complicated. And you've done a good job of giving us some perspective on that, Matt. And we could probably go on for hours about that. But I want to thank you for sharing all this with us, and the best of luck going into this trial. And why don't we catch up here sometime soon and find out how it's going, and keep tabs on you, so our viewers can sort of hear the latest on what's happening with you. Hopefully, it'll be very positive in its outcome.
Yeah, let me leave everybody with this. Please don't have a false sense of security about your coverage. My first chemotherapy was a product called Revlimid. You take 21 pills, then you take a week off, and then you start again. Those 21 pills today cost roughly $19,000.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it doesn't get any better. So we can leave it at that.
Yeah. Okay. All right, Matt. Well, listen, thank you. And we'll look forward to talking again soon.
All right. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, you bet.